this was the thing about all the props and the costumes. Often they were things that would get like 2 seconds of screen time.
Right.
But the amount of thought and effort that had gone into them, like someone had a design and come up with that and carved it for weeks, days, hours.
Did you notice it on set when you look at it and go, I can't believe
you completely did, and it instead of just feeling like you're on a medieval movie set and you're like, oh, look at that, that's, you know, that you could snap that in two. Everything felt quite real and
really?
Like proper and authentic, and it really helped you get into the vibe, because you were, I mean, especially, I'll show you on the costume when we go by it, like everything was pretty much legit. So
right.
You had like, everything had to be laced. There was no like Velcro underneath. There was no like quick release costumes.
So I talked to Michelle Clapton about this about a month ago. Like, she said everything had to be legit, because you had to feel as though you lived in that moment.
And it really made the difference. And I think that's one of the reasons. There are many reasons why Game of Thrones was so unique, but one of them, I think, was just the total commitment from every area, from every department, to real immersion and authenticity. So, you know, all the way down to like the books. I've seen you've got a couple of like parchment paper. Those would be handwritten, and you know, you would never see that on screen.
Right.
You get like maybe half a second of out of focus, but someone had thought it through. And even if you didn't see that explicitly, it just lent to the gravity of it. Everything felt like there was backstory and history to it. And
so, but it must have been particularly interesting for you, because you're a kid at the time, and you're playing dress up, but there's great gravitas, and you're aware of the fact that this is meaningful, this is significant, this has weight, these costumes are designed for a reason, but you're also a kid getting to play dress up.
And yeah, and I won't lie, it was so much fun. It'd be like, right, I want to play with that, I want to play with that. And because the whole crew and the whole atmosphere of Game of Thrones was so like a family,
right.
The props people would just be like, oh look, Isaac, do you want to play with this? Or have a look at this dagger. I'm like, wow, that's so cool.
Well, that's why, so when you see the sword there, I don't know if when you're on set, if you're like, I mean, what kid doesn't want to play with the sword?
I would always be sort of playing with the sword. I can remember actually, there's a costume down there. I'll say it again when we're down there, but I remember Nikolai, who played Jaime Lannister, being like, do you want to hold it? It's like, yeah! Like 11-year-old me getting to hold this sword, and of course holding it and then being like, so heavy.
So when we were walking around, I just saw you touching the costumes, fidgeting with the costumes. I mean, when you see them now, knowing that this is the last opportunity you're going to have around them, I mean, you haven't seen these in a while.
Well, it's exactly that. These are parts of my own personal history.
Right.
These are things that I would put on every day, and every day through some quite formative years of my life. So, for example, my costume that we have, I wore pretty much all through my teenage years, and so I imagine it's a bit like when you're in your old age and you're going through your garage and you find that leather jacket you used to wear when you were a teenager.
Well, as someone who's much older than you, yes, I do know that feeling quite well, actually. That's my leather jacket, yes, I quite understand it.
Yeah, so it brings back a lot of that. This was always a costume that amazed me.
Yeah.
This was the thing about Thrones, is that because there were so many different storylines, you often didn't interact with a lot of the other characters. Right. So I didn't work with Emilia really until the very last season. So I never got to sort of appreciate these up close. I would look at them on screen and be like, wow, that's amazing.
Well, I mean, look at this. To just see the dragon head. This
so intricate.
I mean, this is the moment, when I think about why I work here and do this kind of stuff, it's because you get to appreciate these dragon heads as extraordinary.
Totally. Well, and so we did, when the show was still going and sort of shortly thereafter, we used to do touring exhibitions of the props and the costumes, because you only really get to appreciate them in their full glory up close, because these are all proper works of art. Do you know what I mean? These aren't just your average costume from a backlot, from a big warehouse that you grab and just throw on any random character. These are things that have had so much thought and design, especially by Michelle Clapton, our costume designer.
So Michelle and I were talking about the fact that that kid hated wearing this because it was so heavy.
Yeah.
But she said it had to be heavy because it affects the way you walk.
And it's things like that just, these little things that you don't even perhaps consciously pick up on,
Right.
that just add to the whole sort of immersion of it. I mean, that's an amazing prop.
You've gotten to hold it since you've been in here.
I have.
You always wanted to hold Longclaw. How was it?
Pretty good. Quite heavy though. Quite heavy. Yeah.
It is. It was surprisingly heavy.
Yeah.
But it had to be because, again, everything has to move the right way, to look the right way.
Yeah.
Nobody buys it if it's not real.
And I loved, so Tommy Dunn, who was our armourer, always would explain, the process of making it Valyrian steel and all the.
Good. You can explain it to me because I'm curious.
And I think, if I'm right, you sort of carefully layered some of this steel upon each other, and there were certain ways of forging it and carving it, or whatever. And again, just so these little patterns that just look like a sort of random pattern are thought through. They're about the history of the world of Game of Thrones, about ancient Valyria and Valyrian steel.
That's what these patterns are?
I believe so. I might
Wow.
be completely making that up, but I think,
You know what? No one will care.
yeah, exactly.
No one will call.
Let's say it with enough authority.
Yeah, no one will go, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Everybody else doesn't know what they're talking about. You, on the other hand, do. Like, so that's what this is here.
Is
With the Oath
brilliant.
Keeper.
Yeah.
Which is, I got to tell you.
That was Jaime Lannister's sword, wasn't it? And then, so that was the sword I can remember Nikolai being like, do you want to hold it? And me being like, yeah, I do. Yeah.
I will say this. I don't collect things like this. That I would own.
Totally.
I mean, there's
I know. Can you imagine getting out, cutting your cake with that?
Can you imagine just going to work with it?
Yeah.
I have to tell you, so when these costumes first came into the office, one thing that astounded me about them was how utterly beautiful they were. Like, somebody asked me the other day, if somebody buys these, where would they wear them? I said, you could wear this for the Met Gala.
You literally, you're so right. You're so right. And Michelle put so much thought into them. There was, in terms of historical influences, in terms of keeping a sort of unified theme, so you can see that the northern costumes all have things in common with each other, because, you would think that those geographical areas would have similar cultures and similar ways of doing things, so that there's so much thought into all these things. I mean, that, for example, is a costume that was in like maybe a couple of scenes.
Right.
And it looks like it could be the sort of lead character's outfit. It's so thoughtfully designed and intricate. I mean, these are great.
I mean, I will say the flowers.
Yeah.
I love this. I love the pattern, the stitching.
And the headgear is so cool.
I mean, it's, as someone who watched 35 seasons of Project Runway, I will tell you this. This is very much in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
For a guy who dresses like this, I love this. Like, I really love this. Like, I'm astounded by the attention to detail, by the craftsmanship.
Yeah.
The chainmail, the weight of it.
I always remember anyone wearing armour complaining about how heavy it was. These were things I never really had to contend with, because I was often sat down in a very comfortable chair.
Well, so when we get to the chair, I want to talk about them, but like this. So the little finger. So Michelle and I were talking about this at a great length. She said that Aiden was very particular about how the collar was worn.
Really?
Like actors. So this is what I wanted to ask you, and we'll get to your costume. But everybody got a little input. Like she said, he would wear the pin here because, and then he would describe why the character would do that.
Interesting.
Do you remember any of those kind of conversations taking place? Were there collaborations between actor and costumer?
For me, I think, particularly for Bran, early on, he was just a kid. He was just a lord, the son of the lord. And I don't think he would have had much input into
Right.
it. It would have been like, you wear that, he would go and have his fitting, and then they'd send them off.
Yeah, but
Whereas
kids are also real picky about what they wear.
You're quite right. But I think that's brilliant to hear because I can imagine Aidan really thinking that through, and Littlefinger would be particular, wouldn't he?
Yes.
He would have his ideas about doing things and his own ideas about status and whatever. So that's I didn't actually know that. I didn't know Aidan had any input in that.
It was very, very picky.
Yeah. I mean, this is great, and this kind of matches the kind of story of the character. You know, it is a bit sneaky. He can kind of hide himself, and it is a bit cloak and dagger.
So that's very interesting because he talks about there's iterations of this costume that have lining inside that nobody else can see, only he knows about,
Really?
because that is the nature of his character, which is that I know things you don't,
Sneaking
therefore
around,
I'm going to have
yeah.
things in my clothes that you don't know about.
Brilliant. I mean, and this is these could all be. I mean, they are museum pieces in their own right, you know, and you're only getting the real history of them by seeing them up close and,
Right.
and analysing them.
So when we talked about art, so I will say this, I noticed
such great
that
stuff.
the velvet dress, that is metal.
Oh wow, yeah. Bloody hell, yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah, that's metal. That's got to be very heavy.
Yeah. God, I wouldn't have liked that. I mean, this is so plush, isn't it? The sort of the velvet. That. And I know we come to it knowing the history of Thrones, but that just screams Cersei Lannister, doesn't it? That just screams, don't mess with me.
So you're a kid. You're what, 10?
Yeah, I was 10 at the
10
start.
at the time. Were you terrified? Were you?
Do you know? No, because even though on screen he's terrifying
Yeah.
and horrible, and it's a scary outfit. I mean, Rory is one of the kindest, most gentle men I've ever met in my life. But also, just being on a set, all the sort of gore is demystified. It's like I can remember Sean Bean just holding his own decapitated head, and you're like, oh right, that's not real. So you could just appreciate it as like dress up as a
Yeah.
kid. You'd be like, God, I want to dress up in that. I do seem to remember Rory finding it quite cumbersome though.
I can't imagine why. I look at that and I'm like, how does somebody put your head, my head, and I'd have to have a head that big to get it in there.
Yeah, that would be quite annoying.
Somebody asked me the other day, was the Hound's helmet metal? I'm like, if it was metal, his head would have snapped off.
Yeah.
Like, there's no universe in which that would have been
Yeah.
metal.
What an iconic sword.
I'm telling you, I mean, that's kind of the extraordinary thing about all this, right? Is that everything here, for fans of the show, is iconic.
Yeah.
For you, is it also that?
It's completely the same. I mean,
Because you watched it as a fan, I assume.
Totally. And I mean, it's this weird hybrid of the two where it's like some of this has personal significance.
Yeah.
Of like, I remember when we were kids, I can remember Maisie being so excited about, right, I'm getting my sword, and we'd all read a bit of the history of it in the books and being like, oh my God, Needle. Right. And I can remember Maisie seeing Needle for the first time, and like she would show us pictures of it and we'd be like, wow, that's so cool. And then on top of that, having then watched the show as a fan,
Right.
you look at it all and you're like, God, that was in that scene or that was in that scene. Especially because a lot of these people, I mean, for example, Cersei,
Yeah.
I never really worked with Lena apart from the first episode. I'm seeing things that I have only really seen on
Really?
TV. Yeah,
I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, because we were all so spread apart. That's great.
When you, because this sort of has multiple layers for you. It's nostalgic. It's professional. It's fandom. But these are very personal relationships.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's like being reunited with familial antiquities.
Completely.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. It's like, I don't know, going through your grandparents' house after
Yeah.
they've died, and you're like, oh wow, I remember that, and having to make those awful decisions of like, oh, we've got to sell that off or keep that. So it's emotional to see it's going. But genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, it's so nice to know that fans of the show are going to be able to own things like this because they're so cool, and we had such a great time playing with them all. I hope people get to play with them too. So yeah, for example, I've never seen this costume before. Oh gosh, is that where it came to a sticky end? That's the other funny thing about looking at some of these costumes.
You see what
is so many of them have got holes in them where people got killed. It's like, for goodness sake.
Well, there's no mystery here, corner.
Yeah,
It's right
yeah.
there.
Yeah. And another costume that really speaks to the character of this kind of floaty, mysterious, kind of witchy type character.
I could see Stevie Nicks buying that.
I could see it's giving Stevie.
I
Nicks.
could.
Yeah.
There's no reason
Yeah.
not to. It's funny. The more I look at them, sort of the more I think, I wish we still dressed like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Big
But then I
time.
was like, not in the summertime.
Yeah.
That is heavy.
Well, so this was this funny thing of, especially us characters who were based in the north.
Right.
You obviously had, especially when it was the long winter that had
You
arrived.
had to be dressed in
You
heavy
had
clothes.
to be dressed for really heavy clothes. And when we were shooting outside in Belfast, that was brilliant news because it was quite cold in Belfast as well. But when you were then in the studio with the fire pits going to be like, oh, we've got to keep warm, it was unbearable. And we all had these crazy cool suits that were like vests you put on underneath your costume with a load of piping, and then you would plug into this like electric pump that would pump ice cold water around your body. And it was very funny. You'd sometimes walk into the green room and just see all these actors like passing out with their nice cool suit activating.
And a little damp.
Yeah.
Walking around going. So, I'm going to get one of these and just use it.
Those are pretty good, aren't they?
I know, right? See, that's the thing. When somebody says, what would you want out of this? They're like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe just a skull I can drink out of.
Yeah. That's a good goblet.
Yeah. See, that's a fantastic. These are the things that like, why didn't they make, did HBO market these? Because I would have,
Yeah.
why did you not have
That
those
would
in the
go down
store?
well.
See, this I would not have wanted to wear during,
Yeah.
good Lord.
Yeah, oh gosh, all the fur pelt, wow. Yeah, these, I mean, again, brilliantly suited that character, but it's big, regal, a bit over the top.
But see, Michelle and I talked about this a lot as well. It's not just about you need to walk the right way. A lot of actors talk about the fact that they don't become their character until they put on their boots and put on their jacket.
Totally.
Is that...
Big
and
time.
obviously, you're learning the craft, you're young.
Yeah.
Is it easier like, oh, I know how to do this
Yeah.
now, I'm in the costume.
Well, as much as I complain about it, but the lacing on my doublet, there was something about that sort of ritual every morning of, and also, you know, you would have someone from the costume department help you lace it up to make sure you got it all right. It did feel a bit like being the sort of young lord of Winterfell and having it laced up and going through the whole procedure and getting a bit fed up with it or whatever. And then you would come out and you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm ready to go.
I see. That's what extraordinary. Michelle and I talked about this a great deal. So she designed everybody's costumes from the first season to the last season, sort of with some idea about the evolution. And the costumes were meant to reflect who the character was and to signal who they were going to become. Were these things that you all were aware of, that the cast was aware of?
Yeah, not. I wouldn't say explicitly. I mean, you would come for your sort of annual costume fitting when we started shooting again, and often, mine stayed the same for quite some time. But for example, when I came back to Winterfell, there was a new costume, as you would in the show. You know, they're back at they're back in their ancestral home. They've been in the same costume possibly for 5 years beyond
We're on
the
a
wall.
journey.
So you kind of felt that evolution happen. I mean, that is a beautiful dress.
Oh, it's extraordinary. I mean, the detail.
Yeah, wow.
That's a Met Gala.
Yeah, that is very Met Gala. Oh, it's my friend Dean's costume.
Yes.
No way.
See,
I'll have to send a picture of that.
I need a casual version of this. I need something I can just wear that looks like that.
Yeah. Again, this is another one I really remember. I remember vividly seeing Nikolai who played Jamie, wearing this.
These swords, they have this sword, the whole thing.
The whole thing. But this was when I remember him really complaining about how heavy it was. Quite rightly.
No, it's heavy just to look at.
But just like this, the sort of dragon scaly, and there's such a sort of form for medieval costumes, especially in sort of medieval costume dramas, some of which don't look that good. You look at some things and they do just look like a sort of, theme park ride. These were ideas that were kind of new, kind of novel for medieval costumes. They were original. You just think of this kind of, I don't quite know what you call them, but the kind of skirt design that all the men have.
Right. They're a bit they have a blouse vibe to them, but the skirt vibe, but they're so regal, and they're so formal, and
they sort of set the tone for what the fashion of the day was in this imaginary world,
when
and
you
it was
see them all together,
consistent.
when you see them all together, it's really weird. They do have a very similar.
They look really. They look like we're in a room of the Metropolitan Museum of ancient history, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, I can see what the kings and queens were wearing in the day.
Everything sort of goes out.
Everything goes out, and these were not. They were not your typical, medieval TV drama costumes.
Right.
They were more original. They were kind of new ideas. Great, love the lovely little detail.
I know, right? I mean, it's just extraordinary to see these.
Yeah.
Like nothing is.
So even down to the belts. So this, I don't know. Michelle would be able to explain this better than me, but every belt had this particular tie.
Yeah.
And we were agreed on that was the way that they were tied because that was just the fashion of the day.
I like that there was an agreement about the fashion of the day. All right, so let's come over here because I want to talk about. So when you look at this, obviously you remember the first time you put it on. You remember the first time it was presented to you.
Totally.
You remember the experience of shooting the show. But it's also kind of a part of you, right? I mean, you were in that. You were cinched into that for a very long time.
Completely. It was such a ritual every day. You would get into it. You would go through the motions, and you would be your character. I mean, so I was doing this earlier, but I was smelling it, and it just literally took me back to like 6 a.m. I'm in the trailer. Someone's helping me get my costume on. It's cold. I'm in Belfast, and it's like they're really sort of key memories in my mind, and they were things that you grew to love. You're like that felt like a bit of me.
Right.
And so seeing it here really kind of brings that all back. It's funny, it's that idea, isn't it? If one day you take something off or you stop doing something and you don't realise that it's the last time. Mm-hmm. I can remember the sort of last times I wore these costumes and being like, wow, that's the end of that. So it's
the last time you took it off. Was it a relief?
Bit of both.
Yeah.
But again, not to labour the point about this lacing, but it was because it was so hard to get it through the holes, and you had to.
Right, and then you're cinched in.
And you're cinched in.
It puts you in a different. You sit in a different position.
Totally, you can't really take it off.
It defines who you are because
it
defines how you stand, and how you, in your case, how you sit.
Yeah, yeah. And we were talking earlier about the level of authenticity of it all. So, for example, this little undershirt could very easily have just been a ruff and could have been stitched into there, and it would save putting on another thing.
Right.
But there are, I think, 3 parts to the top of this. So there's the sort of skirt bit.
Right.
Maybe there are even 4. There are 4. So I think that used to go on first, which is like the big undershirt. Then you had the arms were a little top. Then you had the skirt, and then you had that over the top. Yeah, it was all coming back to me now. Remember.
So the first time you put it on, you went, as a 10-year-old, did you go, what the heck?
I got 10 years of this.
What a nightmare this is going to be. Were you, do you remember what it was like to be 10 putting it on for the first time? I mean, I know it's a weird thing to ask.
Yeah, it's hard to say in some ways because it was all so new and novel to me. I didn't really have time to pause and think about how strange or unique or important it would be. It was just kind of like, oh, put this on now. And like, oh, that looks cool. Or like, get a picture of me mum. I mean, for me in particular, it was funny because most people could come back year upon year and just put their old costume back on. But of course, I was going through puberty. So I think I dread to think how many of these they had to make of me just subtly getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, what a trip down memory lane. Little Bran, teenage Bran.
Meanwhile, I can only imagine what a pleasure and a nightmare it was to have to sit in there, because it does not look comfortable.
So you're right. It was both my best friend and my worst enemy.
Everybody else is trudging around. You're getting, but this still looks very uncomfortable.
So you'd see people would be like that all day, stuck up, and I'd just be there like, oh God. Although the other thing about it, slightly frustrating thing, is that it's supposedly mobile, but it's really not. It basically would just sit in one position. It was very hard to manoeuvre it, and I would be sat in it, and then I'd have blankets over me, and really, because of continuity, I was set in that for the whole scene, or for the sort of whatever setup we were shooting. And so I always was a bit out of the action, because when the director would yell cut, all the other actors could sort of wander off and have a coffee and a chat, and I wouldn't be able to leave my chair. But like, guys, can we come in? Can we hang out round me? But I was always very grateful for having a seat.
Well, I'm very grateful that you were kind enough to give us a tour around all this. I have to tell you, man.
Thanks for
pleasure
having me along. I've just been. Thanks for coming with me. I've just been a bit of a personal trip down memory lane.
I appreciate it.